Tupac Shakur wasn't just a rapper. The FBI classified him as a domestic security threat and monitored him from birth until the day he died. In 2011, the FBI released heavily redacted portions of a 4,000-page surveillance file on Tupac Shakur labeled Tupac Amaru Shakur Domestic Security/Terrorism, but entire sections remain blacked out under national security exemptions, and documents reveal FBI agents attended his concerts, analyzed his lyrics for evidence of anti-government sentiment, cataloged his associations with activists and gang members, and maintained active surveillance operations in Las Vegas the weekend he was shot, yet claimed no agents witnessed the shooting or could identify suspects. This video reveals why the FBI opened a file on Tupac before he recorded his first album, how his mother's Black Panther background made him a surveillance target from childhood, what the released documents say about organized criminal enterprise connections the Bureau was investigating, why FBI presence in Las Vegas on September 7, 1996 was never explained to homicide detectives, and what sections of the file remain classified 28 years after his death under exemptions normally reserved for ongoing national security operations. The FBI analyst turned to page 127 of the Tupac Shakur file. Black bars covered every line, solid redactions from margin to margin. Only the section header remained visible. Subject's political affiliations, threat assessment, classified. She'd processed the declassification request for 3 months, reviewed 4,000 pages of surveillance reports, concert attendance logs, lyric analysis documents, and threat assessments spanning 1989 to 1996. Her supervisor's instructions had been clear. Standard FOIA release, redact sources, methods, and anything compromising ongoing operations. But this wasn't standard. She declassified files on actual terrorists with fewer redactions than this rapper who'd been dead for 15 years. Page 134 showed a surveillance photo. Tupac at a studio in Los Angeles, 1995. Grainy, taken from distance. Someone had been watching him record music and documenting it as intelligence gathering. Below the photo, a notation. Subject continues association with individuals linked to, and then nothing. 2 names erased, black bars where identities should be. Then recommend enhanced surveillance per, and the protocol was gone too. The analyst made a note in her review log. Keeping language neutral, extensive redactions, classification rationale unclear for deceased entertainment figure. What she didn't write. The FBI had treated a 25-year-old rapper like a national security threat, monitored him with resources typically reserved for foreign espionage and domestic terrorism, filed thousands of pages of classified reports about his music, his friends, his politics, his movements. And 15 years after he died in a Las Vegas hospital, someone had decided the public still couldn't know why. The file sat in front of her, 4,000 pages. Maybe 800 would be released with redactions. The rest would stay classified for reasons the Bureau wouldn't explain, and she wasn't authorized to question. She closed the file, placed it in the approved for limited release stack. Somewhere in the redacted sections was the truth about why the FBI had watched Tupac Shakur with the intensity they'd once reserved for Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. But that truth would stay locked behind black bars, at least for now. On April 8, 2011, the FBI released 91 pages of a file labeled Tupac Amaru Shakur Domestic Security/Terrorism. 91 pages out of more than 4,000. The Bureau admitted maintaining. The released pages were heavily redacted, names blacked out, entire sections erased, whole pages reduced to headers and classification stamps with everything between turned to solid black bars. What remained visible revealed something the public hadn't fully understood. Tupac Shakur wasn't just a famous rapper the FBI occasionally monitored. He was an active intelligence target, classified as a potential domestic security threat, surveilled with methods typically used against organized crime figures and political radicals. The file's classification category, domestic security/terrorism. Not entertainment figure, not celebrity, not musician. Threat. The surveillance began before Tupac released his first album. According to partially visible documents, the FBI opened a file on Tupac Shakur in 1989 when he was 18 years old and performing with a digital underground group in Oakland. Why? He hadn't committed crimes, hadn't made threats, was unknown outside local hip-hop circles. The answer appears on one partially visible page. Subject is son of Afeni Shakur, former Black Panther Party member. Born during mother's incarceration related to Panther 21 case. Subject's associations and expressed political views warrant monitoring per established protocols for family members of former domestic security subjects. Translation. Tupac was flagged because of his mother. Afeni Shakur had been a Black Panther. The FBI had monitored the Panthers under COINTELPRO, a program designed to disrupt, discredit, and neutralize Black political organizations. When COINTELPRO officially ended in 1971, the surveillance didn't stop. It evolved. Files were maintained on Panthers and their families. Children of activists were tracked. Legacy monitoring continued under different classification systems. Tupac was born into FBI surveillance. His mother's political past made him a person of interest before he could walk. And when he started making music with political themes, songs about police brutality, systemic racism, poverty, the Bureau's interest intensified. Between 1989 and 1996, the FBI maintained active surveillance on Tupac's activities. Concert attendance logs show agents attended performances in multiple cities: Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta, Oakland, sometimes identifying themselves to local police as federal observers monitoring potential criminal activity, sometimes operating covertly in venues. One log entry from a 1994 concert in Oakland. Subject performed songs with explicitly anti-police lyrics. Audience response enthusiastic. Subject's influence over young African-American males assessed as significant. Recommend continued monitoring of subject's public statements and performances. The FBI wasn't watching Tupac for criminal behavior. They were analyzing his influence, measuring his impact on audiences, treating his music as political organizing that required intelligence gathering. Another entry references lyric analysis. Subject's recorded material includes themes of armed resistance to law enforcement and anti-government sentiment. Lyrics analyzed for evidence of incitement to violence and the rest of the sentence disappeared into a black bar covering the assessment protocols. The FBI was reading Tupac's lyrics, like intelligence documents, breaking down metaphors, searching for coded messages, treating artistic expression as potential evidence of domestic security threats. This wasn't music criticism. It was counterintelligence analysis. The file contains repeated references to Tupac's associations of concern. FBI language meaning people he knew that intelligence agencies considered problematic. One partially visible section. Subject maintains regular contact with 3 names completely erased. These individuals have documented connections to another redaction and represent potential organized criminal enterprise associations requiring continued monitoring. Who were these people? Gang members? Activists? Musicians with their own FBI files? Politicians? Business associates? Every name is redacted, every connection hidden. But the pattern is clear. The FBI was building a network map, documenting everyone Tupac knew, creating association diagrams, showing connections between him and other surveillance targets. Standard counterintelligence practice, used against organized crime, used against foreign espionage networks, used against political movements the government wanted to disrupt. Applied to a rapper making albums about life in American inner cities. The surveillance wasn't about solving crimes Tupac committed. It was about mapping his connections to see what larger networks he might be part of, or what movements he might inspire. And every person close to him became a data point in classified intelligence files that may never be fully revealed. The FBI's classification of Tupac as domestic security/terrorism wasn't arbitrary. It placed him in the same category as political radicals, anti-government extremists, and individuals assessed as threats to federal institutions. Why? What made a rapper a domestic security concern? The answer lies in partially visible threat assessments scattered through the released pages. One assessment, dated 1993, subjects' public statements increasingly contain revolutionary rhetoric and calls for systemic change through any means necessary. Subjects' platform and influence over demographic groups historically susceptible to radical messaging warrants enhanced monitoring and the rest vanished behind classification stamps. Translation: Tupac talked about revolution, about changing systems through direct action, about fighting back against oppression. And because young black men listened to him, bought his albums, attended his concerts, quoted his lyrics, the FBI treated him as someone capable of inspiring the kind of political movement they'd spent decades trying to prevent. Another assessment references specific incidents the FBI considered threatening. Subject made public statements at the event. Location was blacked out, advocating for the cause was gone, and expressing support for 2 more redactions where names should be. These statements align with objectives of groups previously designated as domestic security concerns. Recommend investigation into subjects' potential coordination with, and the final section disappeared into solid black. What event? What statements? What groups? all erased from the public record. But the implication is clear. Tupac said something at a public event that made the FBI believe he might be coordinating with political organizations they considered dangerous. Was he speaking at a Black Power rally, supporting political prisoners, advocating for police reform, expressing solidarity with revolutionary movements? Whatever he said, it triggered recommendations for enhanced surveillance and investigation into potential coordination with domestic security threats. Tupac's speech became classified information. His political expressions became intelligence targets. The file contains references to COINTELPRO, the FBI's infamous counterintelligence program. One partially visible section, Assessment of Subjects' Activities, parallels patterns observed during operations involving Black Panther Party and similar organizations. Recommend application of disruption techniques if subjects' influence continues to expand. The specific COINTELPRO techniques being recommended. Completely redacted. Just a black bar where operational methods should be. COINTELPRO had officially ended in 1971, after congressional investigations exposed the program's illegal tactics, infiltration, surveillance, psychological warfare, and extra-legal force used to destroy political organizations the FBI considered threatening. But this 1995 document references disruption techniques in present tense, recommending methods against Tupac if his influence continued to grow. What techniques? Infiltration of his circle, planting informants, creating conflicts between him and associates, leaking information to media to damage his reputation? All of the above had been COINTELPRO staples used against black leaders in the 1960s. And here in the 1990s, the FBI was discussing applying similar methods to a rapper whose crime was making music about police brutality and systemic inequality. The specific techniques they recommended remain classified, but the intent is documented. Multiple documents reference coordination with local law enforcement. The FBI was sharing intelligence about Tupac with police departments in cities where he lived and performed. One entry, information regarding subjects' Los Angeles activities shared with LAPD per standing liaison protocols. LAPD reports investigation involving subject and associated individuals. Bureau to monitor developments and provide assistance as requested. What investigation? Who were the associated individuals? Both completely redacted. Just confirmation that information was flowing from federal surveillance to local police forces. This coordination meant local police had access to federal intelligence files. Knew the FBI considered Tupac a domestic security concern. Could use that classification to justify enhanced attention and investigation. When Tupac was arrested for assault, weapons charges, sexual abuse allegations, were those legitimate law enforcement actions, or were they influenced by FBI intelligence suggesting he was a political threat who needed to be disrupted? The file doesn't answer that question, but it documents that information was flowing from federal surveillance operations to local police forces that had their own reasons for wanting Tupac watched, investigated, and prosecuted. The line between legitimate law enforcement and political targeting becomes impossible to distinguish when intelligence agencies classify someone as a domestic security threat based on their speech and influence rather than their actions. In 1995-1996, the FBI's focus on Tupac shifted. New sections of the file reference organized criminal enterprise investigations, gang connections, East Coast versus West Coast hip-hop conflicts, business disputes that might involve criminal activity. One partially visible entry from early 19 subjects association with death row records, and a name completely blacked out, likely Suge Knight, presents potential organized crime connections requiring investigation. Subjects' public statements regarding conflict with another redaction, probably Bad Boy Records, or specific East Coast figures, suggest escalating situation with potential for violence, recommend enhanced surveillance in coordination with, and the coordinating agency was erased. The FBI was monitoring the East Coast-West Coast rap feud, documenting conflicts between record labels, treating music industry disputes as organized crime investigations. Death Row Records, the label Tupac signed with after getting out of prison in 1995, had known connections to gang figures. Suge Knight, the label's CEO, had documented ties to Blood's gang members in Los Angeles. The FBI knew this, monitored it, filed intelligence reports about entertainment industry figures with gang associations. But the question remains, was the Bureau investigating actual criminal activity, or were they using organized crime frameworks to justify continued surveillance of a political figure they'd been watching since he was 18? One section references a 1995 shooting incident in New York where Tupac was shot 5 times and robbed at a recording studio. Subject survived multiple gunshot wounds during robbery at Quad Studios in Manhattan. Subject publicly accused, 2 names completely gone, and another name erased, of involvement or prior knowledge. Bureau assesses these accusations as potentially destabilizing to ongoing investigation, and whatever they recommended was classified. Tupac was shot 5 times, nearly killed. And the FBI's concern wasn't solving the shooting. It was that Tupac's public accusations about who was involved might destabilize some investigation they were conducting. What investigation? Who were they investigating that Tupac's accusations might compromise? All redacted, every critical detail erased. But the implication is chilling. The FBI knew something about the 1995 shooting, had intelligence about potential suspects or circumstances, and rather than helping solve it, they worried Tupac talking publicly about what happened might interfere with their operations. His victimization became an intelligence management problem. His survival became something to monitor and control rather than something to investigate and resolve. Another section references wiretaps and electronic surveillance. One line visible. Pursuant to court authorization, electronic surveillance of subjects' communications has yielded intelligence regarding, and then nothing. Just black bars covering whatever they learned. Information shared with the receiving agencies were redacted, per established protocols. The FBI was intercepting Tupac's phone calls, reading his communications, listening to private conversations. Under what authority? What crime were they investigating that justified wiretaps on a musician? The authorization details are redacted. The intelligence gathered is redacted. What they did with the information is redacted. But the fact of surveillance is documented. Tupac's privacy was violated under some classified legal framework the FBI invoked but won't explain. And whatever they learned was shared with other agencies under protocols for distributing intelligence on domestic security threats. Tupac thought he was making phone calls. The FBI was recording them, analyzing them, and sharing them with other intelligence agencies as part of an ongoing national security operation, for reasons they still won't explain, and evidence they still won't release. The final sections of the released file cover September 1996, the month Tupac died. Multiple entries document FBI presence in Las Vegas during the first week of September. One entry, dated September 5, 1996. Agents deployed to Las Vegas per operation involving subjects affiliated with the rest of the line disappeared into black. Subject Tupac Shakur confirmed in city for the event was redacted. Surveillance teams briefed on potential and whatever they were briefed about was completely classified. FBI agents were in Las Vegas 2 days before Tupac was shot. Not by coincidence. They were there conducting some operation involving people affiliated with something they won't name. And they knew Tupac was in town. Briefed surveillance teams about his presence. Anticipated potential something that's locked behind classification stamps. Potential violence, potential criminal activity, potential opportunity for intelligence gathering. The file doesn't say, but it documents that federal agents were in Las Vegas, aware of Tupac's presence, and conducting operations that somehow related to him or his associations right up until the night he was shot. September 7, 1996, the night of the shooting. Tupac attended the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. Afterward, he and Suge Knight left in Knight's BMW to attend a club event. At 11:15 p.m., they stopped at a red light on Flamingo Road. A white Cadillac pulled alongside. Someone inside opened fire. Tupac was hit 4 times. Knight drove to the hospital, where doctors fought for 6 days to save Tupac's life. He died September 13, 1996 from respiratory failure and cardiac arrest caused by gunshot wounds. The FBI file contains exactly one entry about the shooting, dated September 8, 9. Subject Tupac Shakur involved in shooting incident Las Vegas. September 7. Subject sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Status critical. No bureau personnel present during incident. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has primary jurisdiction. Bureau monitoring situation. 2 sentences. Clinical. Detached. After 7 years of active surveillance, thousands of pages of intelligence reports, agents in Las Vegas conducting operations the same weekend, the FBI's official response to Tupac being shot was monitoring situation. No agents witnessed it. No intelligence about who might be responsible. No assistance offered to homicide investigation. Just monitoring. But here's what doesn't make sense. If FBI agents were in Las Vegas conducting operations involving people affiliated with whatever they were investigating, and if Tupac was known to be in the city and surveillance teams were briefed about potential threats, How did no agents witness or have intelligence about a shooting that happened at a busy intersection with dozens of witnesses? Either the FBI's surveillance operation was incompetent, or they were watching something else and Tupac's shooting wasn't relevant to their operational priorities, or they witnessed more than they admitted and chose not to document it in files that might eventually be released. One heavily redacted section dated September 9, post-incident assessment indicates a name was completely erased. May have been present in vicinity of shooting. This individual is subject of ongoing investigation. No evidence, Bureau operations compromised. Recommend. And the recommendation vanished into classification. Someone the FBI was investigating may have been near the shooting. Someone whose name remains classified 28 years later. Someone whose presence wasn't considered relevant enough to mention to Las Vegas homicide detectives investigating Tupac's murder. The Bureau assessed that their operations weren't compromised, meaning their intelligence gathering wasn't exposed or disrupted by the shooting. Whether their operations were connected to the shooting, that assessment, if it exists, is completely hidden behind black bars that may never be removed. The FBI file doesn't end when Tupac died. It continues for months after September 13th. Multiple entries document post-subject monitoring of people in Tupac's circle, associates, business partners, family members. One entry from October 19th, enhanced surveillance maintained on 3 names erased, and another name gone, per assessment that subject's death may precipitate retaliatory actions or escalation of ongoing conflicts. Bureau coordinating with LAPD regarding and the coordination details disappeared into redaction. The FBI was watching Tupac's friends and associates after he died, anticipating retaliation, monitoring for escalation of whatever conflict they'd been tracking, treating his death not as the end of surveillance operations, but as a potential catalyst for new intelligence priorities. Another entry references the investigation into Tupac's murder, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department investigation ongoing. Bureau has provided intelligence regarding potential suspects, and the rest of the sentence was solid black. No request for direct Bureau involvement received from LVMPD. Monitoring situation through established liaison channels. The FBI claims they provided intelligence about potential suspects to Las Vegas police investigating the murder. What intelligence? Who were the suspects they identified? All redacted, names erased, details classified. But the file confirms the FBI had intelligence about who might have killed Tupac, shared it with local police, and apparently nothing came of it. Either the intelligence was wrong, or it was ignored, or it identified people who couldn't be touched for reasons the Bureau won't explain. 28 years later, Tupac's murder remains unsolved. No arrests, no charges, no trial. And the FBI intelligence about potential suspects remains classified under national security exemptions that protect names and information the public can't see. One particularly disturbing entry from November 1996 discusses ongoing domestic security assessment. Despite subject's death, assessment of subject's influence and legacy continues. Subject's recorded material remains commercially successful, and subject's image has achieved martyr status among demographic groups previously identified as susceptible to subject's messaging. Recommend continued monitoring of individuals and organizations utilizing subject's image or legacy for political organizing purposes. Even dead, Tupac remained a domestic security concern. His music, his image, his influence, his martyr status. The FBI was monitoring people who invoked Tupac's name or legacy for political organizing, treating his memory as a potential threat that required ongoing intelligence operations. A dead man's legacy classified as a domestic security matter. His influence beyond the grave something to watch and document and analyze for signs of the kind of political movement the Bureau had spent decades trying to prevent. The final released entry is dated March 1997, 6 months after Tupac died. Subject file closure assessment. Despite subject's death, associated investigations remain active. File will remain open pending resolution of 2 investigations completely redacted. Continued monitoring authorized per and the authorization disappeared into black bars. The FBI didn't close Tupac's file when he died. Kept it active, continued operations, for reasons completely hidden but described as associated investigations that required ongoing monitoring. What investigations? What associates? Why did watching a dead man's legacy require classified federal operations? The file doesn't explain. Just documents that even death didn't end the FBI's interest in Tupac Shakur and what his life represented. The surveillance that began when he was 18 continued after he died at 20. Because to the Bureau, Tupac was never just a person. He was a symbol, a threat, a domestic security concern that required monitoring even in death. The 91 pages released in 2011 represent roughly 2% of the complete file the FBI maintains. More than 3,900 pages remain classified, entire sections the public has never seen and may never see. The FBI's justification for keeping them sealed: information redacted pursuant to FOIA exemptions, national security, personal privacy, confidential sources, and law enforcement techniques. Translation: releasing more would harm national security, expose confidential sources, reveal law enforcement methods, and violate privacy of people mentioned in the file. But Tupac is dead. Most people mentioned in a file from 1989-1996 are elderly or deceased. The political landscape has completely shifted. What national security interest is served by keeping decades-old surveillance records on a dead rapper classified? The most frustrating aspect: names. Dozens of names appear in the released pages. Every single one is redacted. Solid black bars where identities should be. Subject maintained association with name gone. A known descriptor erased, with ties to another black bar covering organizations or networks. Subject's public statements in support of names completely hidden, and more redactions align with messaging of groups previously designated, and the group classifications vanished into black. Surveillance indicates subject meeting regularly with another name erased at location gone, for purposes assessed, and the assessment disappeared. Who was Tupac meeting? Who were the people the FBI considered threatening enough to monitor? What groups did they think he was coordinating with? All erased behind black bars that may never be removed. The justification: revealing names would compromise confidential sources or ongoing operations. But whose operations? What sources? If the FBI was using informants in Tupac's circle, planting people close to him to gather intelligence, those people are still being protected 28 years later. Either because revealing them would expose intelligence methods still in use, or because those informants became witnesses to things the Bureau doesn't want examined. One researcher who studied the released file noted something disturbing about the redaction patterns. Sections discussing Tupac's political statements and activism, heavily redacted. Sections discussing his music and artistic expression, heavily redacted. Sections discussing FBI surveillance methods and intelligence operations, completely redacted. Sections discussing cooperation with local law enforcement, partially visible but names and specific operations blacked out. But one category is almost entirely gone: anything discussing what the FBI knew about threats to Tupac's life. If the Bureau had intelligence about who might want him dead, if informants reported threats, if surveillance operations picked up indications of planned violence. All of that, if it exists, is completely classified. Either the FBI had no intelligence about threats to Tupac, despite 7 years of intensive surveillance, or they had intelligence and chose not to act on it, or they classified that intelligence under exemptions that keep it secret decades after his death. None of those possibilities reflect well on an agency that claims domestic security as its primary mission. The redacted sections hold answers. The black bars covering names, locations, assessments, and intelligence reports contain the truth about why the FBI watched Tupac and what they knew about the circumstances that led to his death. But someone decided those answers are too dangerous to release, that the public can't be trusted with information about how intelligence agencies treat black artists who speak about systemic injustice. The redactions aren't protecting national security, they're protecting institutional secrecy, covering failures and possibly criminal negligence with classification stamps and black bars that may never be lifted. Tupac Shakur died 28 years ago in a Las Vegas hospital. His murder remains unsolved. No arrests, no charges, no trial, and the FBI file that might explain why remains 98% classified. But what we can see in the released 2% reveals a disturbing pattern. The FBI treated a musician as a domestic security threat, classified him alongside terrorists and political radicals, surveilled him with methods typically reserved for foreign espionage and organized crime. Not because he committed crimes, but because he had political views, made music about systemic oppression, had influence over young black Americans, who the Bureau viewed as potentially susceptible to radical messaging. The implications go beyond one rapper's death. If the FBI treated Tupac this way, surveilled him from birth because of his mother's politics, analyzed his lyrics for anti-government sentiment, monitored his concerts, intercepted his communications, coordinated with police to investigate him, who else has been subjected to similar treatment? How many artists, activists, political figures, and community organizers are currently in FBI files classified as domestic security threats because their speech and influence make intelligence agencies nervous? The surveillance programs that targeted black political movements in the 1960s officially ended. But Tupac's files suggest they didn't end. They evolved, got reclassified, continued under different legal frameworks and operational names. COINTELPRO became counterterrorism, became domestic security investigations. Same targets, same methods, different paperwork. And the targets still can't see their files, can't challenge the surveillance, can't know what intelligence agencies are documenting about their legal, constitutionally protected political expression. In 2014, activists filed additional FOIA requests for complete release of Tupac's FBI file. Request denied. Bureau cited same exemptions: national security, confidential sources, law enforcement techniques. In 2020, following protests against police violence and renewed attention to FBI surveillance of black activists, new requests were filed. Denied again. The file remains classified, 3,900 pages the public can't see. Whatever the FBI knows about why they watched Tupac, what they learned from 7 years of surveillance, what intelligence they had about threats to his life, who they were coordinating with in Las Vegas the weekend he was shot, all of it locked behind exemptions that may not expire for decades, if ever. The Bureau claims national security requires keeping these secrets. But whose security? Certainly not Tupac's. He's been dead for 28 years. Not his family's. They've been asking for answers just as long. The only security served by classification is the FBI's institutional security, protection from accountability, protection from questions about whether their surveillance operations were legal, ethical, or connected to a murder they claim no knowledge of despite having agents in the city conducting operations the same weekend. The file exists, complete, unredacted, over 4,000 pages documenting 7 years of watching a man whose crime was making music about the reality of being black in America. And someone decided that truth is too dangerous to release. Some investigators believe the FBI file holds answers not just about Tupac's surveillance, but about his death. Not because the Bureau killed him, but because their operations may have intersected with the circumstances that led to the shooting in ways they've never disclosed. Consider the timeline. FBI agents in Las Vegas, September 5 to 7, 1996, conducting operations involving subjects affiliated with something completely redacted. Tupac in Las Vegas, same weekend. Bureau aware of his presence. Surveillance teams briefed on potential threats that remain classified. Shooting happened September 7. FBI claims no agents witnessed it, no intelligence about suspects. But post-shooting entries reference potential suspects the Bureau identified and shared with police, intelligence that apparently led nowhere. Either the FBI is telling the truth, they had agents nearby conducting unrelated operations, and coincidentally had no intelligence about a public shooting that happened at a busy intersection, or they're protecting operational details that would reveal they knew more than they've admitted about the circumstances surrounding Tupac's death. One theory, supported by multiple researchers, the FBI was monitoring East Coast-West Coast gang conflicts through informants embedded in circles connected to both bad boy records and death row records. If true, the Bureau would have had real-time intelligence about escalating tensions, about threats being made, about retaliation being planned. They would have known violence was likely, known Tupac was a target, known specific individuals planning specific actions, and they would have faced a choice: intervene and expose their operations, or let events unfold and maintain their intelligence gathering. The file suggests they chose the latter, monitored without preventing, documented without acting. After Tupac was shot, they assessed whether their operations were compromised, not whether they could have prevented it, not whether informants had warned about threats, just whether their surveillance infrastructure was exposed. That assessment, whether they could have saved him, may be in the 3,900 classified pages, or it may have never been conducted, because preventing the death of a domestic security subject wasn't part of their operational mission. Another possibility, the FBI knew about the 1995 New York shooting where Tupac was shot 5 times. The file references that incident and notes Tupac's public accusations, potentially destabilizing to some investigation. What if the Bureau had intelligence about who was behind that shooting? What if their ongoing investigation required letting suspects remain free to gather evidence on larger criminal enterprises? And what if those same individuals or networks were involved in the 1996 Las Vegas shooting? The FBI might have intelligence connecting both incidents, might know who orchestrated them and why, might have documented evidence in classified files they can't release without exposing investigative failures. The failure to act on intelligence that could have prevented a murder because doing so would have compromised ongoing operations deemed more important than one man's life. Speculation, yes, but speculation necessary because the Bureau won't release the files that would definitively answer whether they had intelligence about threats to Tupac they chose not to act on. The redacted sections hold those answers. The names erased from suspect lists. The intelligence assessments blacked out. The operational details classified. Somewhere behind those black bars is the truth about what the FBI knew and when they knew it. But they've decided we're not allowed to know. FBI Headquarters, J. Edgar Hoover Building, Washington, D.C. Records Vault, Climate Controlled, Restricted Access, Tupac Amaru Shakur, Domestic Security/Terrorism. Over 4,000 pages, growing even now as researchers file new FOIA requests, and the Bureau adds processing documentation to the file. Somewhere in that complete file is the truth about why a teenage rapper became a domestic security target, why the FBI spent 7 years and untold resources monitoring an artist making albums about poverty and police violence, why agents were in Las Vegas the weekend he was shot, what intelligence they had about who killed him. In 2011, the FBI released 91 pages. More than 3,900 remain classified. Page 127. Political affiliations, threat assessment, every line erased. Page 134. Surveillance photo of Tupac in studio. Names of associates completely blacked out. September 1996 entries, FBI agents in Las Vegas. Operation Purpose redacted. Post-shooting entry, potential suspects identified, every name classified. 28 years after Tupac died, the FBI still protects secrets about why they watched him. Not because releasing the file would harm Tupac. Because releasing it would expose how the Bureau treats black artists and activists as domestic security threats for expressing political views. Because releasing it might reveal they had intelligence about threats to his life they chose not to act on. Because releasing it would document that surveillance programs designed to destroy black political movements never ended. They just got reclassified and continued under different names. The file exists. Complete, unredacted. Tupac Amaru Shakur. Domestic security/terrorism. A rapper classified as a terrorist for making music about injustice. The black bars know why. The erased names know who. The redacted sections know what the FBI did and didn't do. We're not allowed to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever.